Hey, I'm Stephen Glosser.
And I'm Megan Pikert.
Welcome to the Going Somewhere podcast.
A podcast for anyone who finds themselves in the ambiguous adventure of young adulthood.
A season that's marked by uncertainty, change, love, heartbreak, and a whole lot of big decisions.
Join us for some real conversations as we dig into what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus in this beautiful yet complicated season of life.
We're so glad you're here, and we'd love to have you join our little Going Somewhere podcast community. Follow us on Instagram at goingsomewhere.podcast and join the conversation.
We're all going somewhere. We might as well go there together.
Thanks for listening. Let's jump into today's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 92 of the Going Somewhere podcast. How's it going?
It's good. 92. This feels big.
92 is the one for you that really just said, wow, this is big.
We made it. We've made it.
Well, for those tracking at home, the goal earlier this year was, can we make it to 100? And we are, 8 away, and we have more than 8 weeks left in the year, which is super exciting. So we're doing it, Megan.
We're doing it,
and thanks everybody for hanging out with us. It's been fun. It's been a good time, and just on the front end of this podcast, as you guys have probably known, there's been a lot of conversation about what next with the podcast, and those are still things that we're talking about, and still things that are coming. But I think around when we break 100 will be kind of when we start to unveil some new things with the podcast.
Yeah, the podcast, it's leveling up because we had our first podcast planning meeting a couple weeks ago, and that felt like, we're getting some wheels under this thing.
Like we've had side conversations. Every week we kind of talk about what should we talk about, all that stuff. But this was like, let's plan out the next 5 weeks and let's dig into what is the heart of this thing. And, for one thing, this thing started as a young adult podcast. And for the most part, large part, I know a lot of you listening are young adults, but what we've also realized is that there's a lot of not young adults. They're still amazing. You're not old, people listening to this and really experiencing or, being impacted by it. And I think that's always been in the back of our minds is the topics we're talking about, we always gear it very specifically towards young adults. We try to find ways to, but almost every topic, new seasons, or whether it's about finances or whether it's about they're topics that are relevant to a lot of people. And so I know for us, just the cores that have kind of come out are, rhythms and intentional living. And, the idea of you're facing your current reality of where are you today and where are you trying to go? And so those are some of the things that we're trying to figure out. How do we weave this thing into something bigger? And, that's kind of a little State of the Union address, but just, 8 more episodes as is pretty much. And then I think that's when we'll make the pivot.
Yeah. Exciting.
Yeah. We were going to talk about that, but there I went.
Yeah.
Sneak peek.
That's
Sneak peek. But yeah, it's been fun. Can I just say one other thing?
Yeah.
So a lot of this season, and I know we talked about it with Dan last week, but a lot of the season for me is kind of, figuring out, okay, what's next, not all entirely. Cause when we said yes to this new opportunity with Valley and the open doors that created for writing and speaking and building some other stuff, it was always okay, I have a lot of things in mind, but what do I do and how do I do it? And, I think Dan kind of said it last week, focus on adding value, not making money. And I realize I've been just thinking about that a lot of just man, that has totally been kind of what I am trying to build a business on and then a life on is finding ways to add value and then figure out what sticks. And so it's kind of been fun. There's been some fun little developments in that we'll probably talk more about in the future, but it's just exciting. I don't know. And so talking about the podcast, it's kind of been, I want this to be something that adds the most value, to maximize the minutes we have in your ears, in your ear holes, any given week. We want this to be maximized. So if there's ways that you think that could be, if there's things that you've longed for on this podcast or, just let us know. Cause I think we're trying to build this in a direction that will maximize value. So
Yeah.
there's
So
that.
good.
There's
So
that little
good.
soapbox.
Yep. All right. You guys get the behind the scenes of what happens in podcast planning meetings, all the conversations. But yeah, we're really excited about today too. And, maybe it's just because we're coming up on 100. So we got all bets are off on the podcast topics. And so today we're really excited because we're going to talk about confession. Dun, 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 So
We're so excited.
so excited. And I think for some reason, when I hear confession, your mind goes to certain things, maybe personal experiences or past things that you've been a part of. But sometimes it can feel like a really heavy word. And I think part of our heart with just talking about it today was like, it's not a scary thing. And there's actually so much freedom in confession and how we can actually live that out and the benefits of it. And so we're going to be talking about that today. I think that comes from, we've both had personal experiences doing, like, living out our faith with healthy confession in communities, and also where we've like hidden from confession. And so I think this is something that we really resonate with, but also something that can really benefit you too that are listening today.
Yeah, I remember 2 years ago at Rhythm Conference, Jordan Smucker, pastor in Ohio, he was here to speak, and he preached a whole message on confession at a young adult conference. And I just loved it because I think sometimes we enter into those conference spaces and event spaces and we go like, okay, we need to make a big bang. We need to make it about purpose and calling and, or like come to Jesus. But he was really talking about, we need a rhythm of confession. Like we need that to be a normal part of our life, just like any other aspect of friendship and community. Like confession needs to be a core of that. And that just kind of stuck with me. And so it's been kind of fun to learn ways and, like even in my groups, the last couple of years of just kind of meeting new guys and guys that I would meet through Alpha or through church in different ways or just in life, and then inviting them into a group dynamic in a group setting. The thing that was always natural was just like the conversation about the Bible, reading books together, even just talking about like what's going on in our lives. But I think the thing that wasn't natural was like creating space for confession, creating space where there was safety, whether that was maybe not as much in one-on-one relationship because that was easier, but I just didn't have the capacity to meet with every guy on a regular basis. And so one of the things that we did was it was supposed to be a week and it ended up being 3 where we just we went to a safe place and we just opened it up. Hey, each guy, we're just going to walk through and we're just going to confess what's going on, confess sin, confess whatever. And so it was just so powerful, like the prayer that came out of that. And so I think that's kind of sparked like this conversation a little bit. And in just kind of a biblical foundation, James 5:16 says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results. And I just love that. Confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Like healing is on the heels of confession. And it's because of the prayer that flows out of that. But I think just that's the thing that many of us are missing out on. I think and this might be you listening today, is like, man, I want healing in this area. I want breakthrough in this area. I want I want to overcome this sin struggle that I've carried with me for years. Well, the Bible is so clear. Like, confess your sins to each other, pray for each other that you may be healed. Like, healing is right lumped in there with confession and community and relationship. Like, that is where healing takes place.
Mm-hmm. It's so good. That scripture always reminds me of another podcast, the Handlebar podcast. Love them, shout out. And they did an episode on confession, and they talk about that verse. And they just have one line. Someone on the podcast said, if we go to God to get forgiveness and grace, we go to others to get healing. And that was so powerful for me. And I think that's really what woke me up to the idea of confession to other people, that I could confess with the Lord and be apologetic and feel sorry and feel convicted that I was doing things that I shouldn't have been, and I would tell the Lord in prayer. But I would, you fall back in. You don't have accountability in the same way, and you don't have people that are like journeying with you through it. And so then hearing that really changed my mindset specifically to, okay, what does it look like to like tell someone the thing you don't want to say, and then have to sit across from someone face to face, and how are you going to be received? And then you get all like the questioning behind it, but then actually acting on it, finding someone in your life that you can share the tough thing with that you've never said out loud before, and being received with grace, being received with accountability, being received with the healing that you're promised in Scripture, that confess to one another so that you may be healed. And it's just, there's so much power in it.
For sure. And I mean, just another even biblical example that I think it comes to mind for a lot of us is David and Nathan. It's in 1 Samuel when David, sleeps with Bathsheba and things go from bad to worse. And he's literally, this whole thing, he's covered his tracks on the surface so well. Like, nobody's accusing him of doing it. He's going to get away with it. And then God speaks to Nathan. Nathan confronts David, and David confesses that sin. Like, Nathan challenged him, we see like the arc. That's, I think if that didn't happen, David doesn't have the opportunity to be a man after God's own heart. But Nathan drew him back into that, and confession drew him back into that, of just being able to face that. There was consequences. He had to walk through the consequences of that sin, the embarrassment, all that stuff was lumped into it. But he also stayed on track with God and what God had for his life. And I just think that's powerful. And sometimes, maybe we wait for like a Nathan, and I think I've had that in my life before, where somebody's confronted me on something and it was the last thing that I wanted, but it was the best thing that could have happened. But I think I've been challenged in the past, and I try to live this way of like, don't make somebody confront you, for something. Like, you need to have a rhythm where you're confessing the deep things and the things that are unseen. It's really what confession is it's shining a light onto dark things. It's being proactive in that, because everything that is in the dark will come to light. That's what the Bible says. Like, we will give account for every fruitless act and fruitless word. And like, that should put the fear of God into us, that like the things that are hidden now, the things that are under the surface that nobody knows, like God knows, first of all, and I will give account for those things. And so God's put people in our lives. He's put, whether it's people in a systemized group structure, or he's put pastors, he's put friends in our lives that we can walk this thing out with. And this is part of that journey. Like, confession is a part of our spiritual formation. It's a part of our spiritual development. It's part of what God's really put into place for us to become more like him, more like Jesus, and to live the life that we're called to live. And I think for many people, it's something that we just bypass and we just skip over it, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's so good. From my personal experience, I went through a season where I had a group of friends that we practiced like a rhythm of confession with one another. And honestly, that came out of a time when we were all, it was the three of us, and we were all talking. We were like, we don't really confess anything anymore, like we kind of just go through the motions. We know that we've messed up, and we try to do better next time, and kind of go about our lives. And it just happened from reading Proverbs 27:17. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so too one friend sharpens another. And we were just reading that verse, and we were like, man, what does it mean to sharpen someone? And we sometimes think of it, like that's a really nice friend verse, but sharpening hurts,
Yeah.
Iron against iron, there's sparks, there's pain, it's a mess. And so we started building in every Thursday, and the difference for us was that we were all long distance friends. So it was a FaceTime call, 6 a.m. Thursday, and every week we'd hop on, and it was just, what do you need to confess? There was no sugarcoating it. There was no like, oh, all this fluff. It was like, nope, like what has gone on this week that, we had one girl that was engaged that was in that season. That can be really hard and challenging, and, other seasons for each of us. And so, but what that space did, it was uncomfortable for the first couple of weeks. It was like, I don't want to share that thing, or I have to say this again. Like, again, my words were harmful to someone else. Again, I chose anger over something else, but over time, that became my favorite part of my week. And to be able to come back and offer praise reports over something that, hey, I haven't struggled with this week, or I took that thought captive this week, and getting to pray for one another, getting to see things come to pass for each other in our lives. But it came from feeling like we didn't have a space for it, feeling like we didn't have friends that like were a safe space. Those two girls that I did that with weren't my best friends before we started that,
Right.
It was just like kind of all three of us were feeling the same way. Okay, let's be the community that we're looking for. And then through that, those friendships became some of my closest friends today. And so, yeah, it was really powerful just having that rhythm of confession. And I don't think you maybe need that all the time, confessing like we did, but for that season, it was extremely impactful and created just such like a appreciation for it.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. And I think at the end of this episode, we'll kind of put some handles to it and kind of talk about what that can look like to create a rhythm. And so I know you'll share a little bit more maybe of how you can even get started with that. One thing that I wanted, and I kind of did this for myself, was gearing up for this. I was like, okay, like James 5:16 has just been such a core for this in my life. But then also, like I grew up, in an Assemblies of God church, and that's been my world. And so, I think like my own experience, confession has never, I would say, never been like a part of like the built-in like rhythm or structure. Like it's always been encouraged, like, and, it's something that's been talked about. But then I've had friends that grew up in different church structures where confession or confessional was like a staple part, like it was a weekly rhythm, like there was a part to it. And I was just curious of just like the history of all of that, and just like, the idea of where did that come from? And then also, why isn't it as powerful maybe for some that it seems like the Bible intended for confession to be? And so this is just a little like, I tamed it down. It's not as nerdy as it could have been. But, really in the early church, confession was communal and in a relational practice. Like we see that in James. We see that even just in like how the church confronts each other. Like there's like an expectation of not only, confession, but also of being willing to call out sin and be willing to call it out and deal with it together as a community. It wasn't as privatized. Believers met in homes. They shared struggles openly. They prayed for one another and found healing together. Over time, as Christianity became more institutionalized, confession shifted from communal to like a duty of the clergy. Eventually, this was formalized in the Catholic Church as confession to a priest in a confessional booth. And so it was really taking something that was obviously good and obviously a part of God's design, but then attaching that to a clergy practice. Like confession no longer, and this isn't just the Catholic Church, but like no longer was it about confessing to a friend, confessing to a peer, confessing to somebody that you're alongside. It was a way of almost like clearing the slate so that you're good again with God. And as much as that there's a component of that in confession, of God's, confessing and allowing God's forgiveness to wash you clean again, but at the same time, it became something that was like, almost, gosh, how do I say it? But it was almost like obligatory. It was like, well, this is part of what this looks like. And so, do that. And so the system preserved accountability and spiritual guidance, but often lost the relational, peer-based, grace-filled connection seen in the early church. The Protestant Reformation emphasized confession directly to God, good in restoring personal faith, but it unintentionally diminished vulnerability and mutual healing. So almost like the pivot was, hey, no, you don't have to go to a priest. You don't have to go to somebody in the clergy. You can just go to God, which is so true. But again, we lose part of the power of this. Confess to one another and pray for each other that you may be healed. And so today, many believers confess silently, but rarely relationally. The result is that we miss out on connection and healing that happens through prayer and community. We've prioritized something God designed to be practiced, or we've privatized something God designed to be practiced in community. And so I just think like that just a little crash course for me was like, okay, where has this come from? And like, I think, again, the idea of confession is something that maybe sparks different things. And I would say I took on the privatized for sure approach, like that was what I felt like that was the right thing, was I just need to confess this to God. And I'm not saying that that's not true or not right, but I just left out people, and I thought that was totally okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which I think that might be maybe more normal than we're willing to admit sometimes, is that we keep a lot of things private. And I think part of this conversation that we'll talk about a little bit too is just the shame piece that is attached with confession. And I think that's part of why we keep it private, is this sense of like, I need to do it and I need to just be better, and like pick yourself up by your bootstraps and figure it out. And I think that's just countercultural to the gospel message, that it's wrapped in compassion and grace and vulnerability. And there's so much to it that we ourselves just naturally like bypass for the sake of independence and like I'll work harder for it, and that like work-based gospel, like, but it says in Ephesians like it's by grace you have been saved through faith, not by your own doing. And so it's like, okay, what does that mean in the context of confession too, that I have a high priest who's able to sympathize with me, that he hears you, the throne is approachable, like that kind of part of the gospel that I think our shame like hinders us from seeing sometimes, that he's not just a God on the throne judging you with a scoreboard behind him, like he is someone that is approachable, that will have compassion for you. And I think that's hard to see when you're in it. Yeah,
for sure. And I think, just that reminder of like the power of confession. Confession is powerful because it leads to healing, spiritually, emotionally, and relationally. Confession it's not just about forgiveness of sin, but the restoration of the heart and community. Like it's about restoration. It's about wholeness. It's about being able to walk in freedom. And so I think there's like the idea, and this is the thing that I feel for myself for many years was in confessing privately to God, like I'm not saying there was not power in that. But I do know in my own story, especially when it comes to just sexual sin and some things like that, like there wasn't sustained victory until people were in my corner, like until people knew the real story, what was really going on. Because for a long time, I talked about it in past tense, and it was just like, this is something I used to deal with. And once I like started to tell, and it was my friend Eric, and then it was Pastor Brad, and it was my small group, and it was Dave, and it was these people in my life, and I told them, they started to pray with me, not only in those moments, but I had people I know behind closed doors that were praying for me, and they were asking me, how's it going? They were being, that is what sparked some of the practical next steps that I took. And so it really was the turning point. Like that wasn't the first time I was aware of my sin. Like that was like, man, I was very aware for a very long time, and it ate me alive. And I just kept going to God, and not that he wasn't able to, it was just, he had put a path of healing in front of me that I was not willing to say yes to. And so I think, when we confess, we invite others to pray with us, which brings, spiritual strength and accountability and freedom. And it really deepens our relationships, like every time with every person I've ever practiced confession on a consistent basis with, that relationship grows, I kind of like there's been different times where maybe it was an out of the norm slip, that wasn't like something that a person knew. And usually the first person that came to mind of like, I hope they don't know, like I just took on this whole new thing of like, I'm going to tell them. Like, and I remember just going through some stuff, and for whatever reason, my friend Steve Pavic was the first person on my brain of like, oh, I hope like he'll be so mad at me, or like that was what my brain was, that was my flesh was telling me. So I got on the phone and I called him, and I, out of the blue, was like, hey, this is what's going on. I just needed to tell you and tell somebody. And, he just met me with so much grace and prayer. And then over the next several months, and he was following up, and he was just like, hey, how's that thing going? Like, what's going on? And it, like, again, that deepened our relationship. And honestly, like that's happened vice versa. That's been something that when we do our catch-ups, we talk about the twins and fun stuff, but we also usually revisit those areas and talk about like the current state of those things. So I just think it develops deeper relationships. It gets us right with God, and it produces just that deeper connection with God and with others. And so why do you think, but I think this is, why do you think people struggle with this? Because I think the evidence of it being good is pretty clear. Like what the Bible says is pretty obvious. I think if we were to poll everybody listening today and they're like, is confession good and healthy? Everybody would probably be like, yeah, it is. But yet still so many just don't, So why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there's so many reasons that are valid. I've struggled with these areas too. The first one that I think of is like the pride that we don't want to seem weak. We don't want to seem like we need help, or just the idea of asking for help. And I think we feel that as if you're a seasoned Christian, you're like, I shouldn't struggle with this anymore. Like it's my own pride that like I should be better at this. And then you also, maybe you're in a position of leadership or you hold a title, and so you don't want to admit that you're not living to a standard that you're expecting other people to, or that you're trying to lead someone else in. And so the pride of having to admit that you are living in something or doing something, or your words are angry towards another person, is hard, because it makes you come face to face with your own vulnerability, your own humanity, that I'm not perfect. I'm not fully sanctified. I still need the Lord. And I think that just trips us up so often, is just the idea that you have to admit that I don't have it all together. I messed up. I still need the Lord. I need to humble myself. And the idea of humility is a lot easier said than done. Yeah.
We just read through Luke in our life group, and the amount of times that like just humility stood out to me in the Gospels again, or in that particular gospel, was just like eye-opening again of like, man, humility is really like the key to the kingdom. And so of course pride is something that's going to keep us away from the kingdom and keep us away from what God has for us. And so, yeah, I think pride is definitely one of just like, that failure to admit weakness, that I don't want to look weak. I don't want to compromise my leadership position. Where I think the counter to that is we may not compromise our leadership position, but we compromise our leadership power, because we're not functioning in the way that God has designed us to. And so I think like the humility is recognizing that I want the power more than I want the position, and so, yeah, pride is a big one. What's another one?
Yeah, another one is just the lies that we can get stuck in, they won't like or accept me, the lies that we believe. We tend to write narratives for other people that they're going to feel this way, or, like you just shared with your friend Steve of like, he's going to be so mad at me, and that was not what you were met with. You're met with grace and understanding and accountability. But I think we can let those lies create foundations in our hearts too, that then it's what we're basing our thinking off of, then, is just always believing that, I won't be accepted if I say that, or that person couldn't understand what I'm going through, or they can't relate, or I'm the only one that's struggling with this. Everyone else's life is better, or the comparison mindset can create so many lies.
That's so good. Yeah, I think, again, just the every time I think that I've walked into confession and just like stepped into it when I didn't want to, I think every time I feared the response of the people that I was with, like just vividly remembering, just sharing things with Pastor Brad and I was just worried, like, will this disqualify me? Will this change our relationship? Will this change, my ability to do what I'm doing? Will this change this friendship? Will this person see me the same way? And again, I think there's dealing with those lies, and then there's just dealing with like the lies, of the enemy of like, no, it's okay. Like, it's okay to struggle with this. Everybody struggles with this. I think there's those areas in our life that maybe, we resist confessing because we're like, well, everybody's dealing with it, or like, this is just normal part of being a young adult, or like, this is just the normal part of being new to faith, and so we just avoid it. And so that's another lie that I think we can believe is just like, everybody's doing it, or it's not that big of a deal. And so again, I think that those are the lies that keep us back. And I think, obviously these also, another big one is shame. And I think this kind of couples with what we're already talking about, but shame is, if guilt is like a recognition of I've done wrong, shame is I am wrong. Like, I'm disgusting. Like I'm a terrible person. I have no use. Like, guilt is recognizing like, man, I've done something really dumb. And then shame is I am really dumb. And I think shame can keep us from confession because, shame is just one of the most dangerous, deadly things that we can keep in our life. It's really a tool of the enemy. It's his distortion of reality. It's his distortion of maybe the guilt that we felt. He twists it and makes an identity. And so when we identify as those things, it's hard to overcome an identity,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. So true. And I think that's such an important distinction, is like, when do you feel guilty and when do you feel shame, and when do you feel conviction versus condemnation, and really recognizing like, how am I feeling towards this area of my life? Am I stuck in the shame spiral, or am I feeling guilty and convicted and I need to invite someone in? And I think one of the reasons that we struggle to confess is that we feel like we have shallow relationships. There's just no one around us that we're like, I trust this person to just share it, or you feel like you have to reach a certain benchmark of or level of friendship or season of friendship or years of friendship before you're willing to like say the thing that you're walking through. And I think that holds us back so much because we wait for this idea of it to be something. But I think the key to those depth in relationships is through these conversations, is through creating, like, taking those little steps that build over time. And that group of friends that I was talking to earlier was like I said, before we started confessing, we weren't the closest. They weren't the people that I was doing life with day in, day out. They weren't the people I was calling on my drive home every day just to catch up. It was just like, here's 3 people that all are wanting to grow and wanting to, grow in community and go deeper. And through confessing and through saying the honesty to the last thing that we don't want to share, the last 10% of what's on our minds, created a foundation for us to build off of. Now it's like, those girls, I could pick up the phone no matter what, even though it might be months in between, and I'm going to tell them because I know what I'm going to be met with, because I have those relational deposits that weren't shallow, that they grew depth over time.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing, is that I do think, like you said, shallow relationships can be one of the things that prevents us from confession, but it's also confession that deepens a relationship. And so the very thing that is holding you back will be the thing that develops what you want. And so I just think, another part of that is isolation, of just feeling like I'm alone. I don't have anybody. And I think if that's the case, like, we want to help you find those people. There's people that are probably within your proximity. And maybe you aren't exposed to them yet. Like, maybe the people that you've been around, you are scared and you have reason to be scared because you've been burnt in the past, or you've been hurt in the past, or maybe I know there's people listening today that have confessed something to somebody they trusted and they told somebody else, and that didn't stay with them, and it in an inappropriate way, and that can be something that will hold you back from doing it again. But I just know that there are people and there, like, there's so much power in this that it's worth taking another stab at it. Like, it's worth stepping back into that water. And kind of the final barrier that we kind of identified is just the independence, you know, and that kind of, I think that comes from pride and shame and shallow relationships and all of these things, but just this idea that I can do this on my own. And that's where my story was the fact that I had these hidden things and a full desire to get them out of my life. Like, I can go back to journal entries of just like pouring out my heart to God of just how I wanted to live for him and how I wanted to not deal with the things that I was dealing with. Like, the desire to be healed was 100% there. But for whatever reason, I just felt like I'm going to do this on my own. Like, I'm going to read the Bible. I'm going to pray. Like, I was doing all these things. I was going to church consistently. I was listening to worship music. I was trying to take things that I heard about dealing with temptation and like trying to do those things. And I was trying to do a lot of the practical things without any sense of relational connection and community. And I can just, for my own story, like, it didn't work, you know, and it doesn't work. And so just navigating that. So question for you listening, how have any of these shown up in your own lives? Like, what maybe jumped out? And can you read them again? Megan, can you share what they are again, just to help people?
Yeah. So some of the common struggles are pride, the lies that we believe, feeling shame, feeling isolated, having shallow relationships, or just your need for independence.
Yep. And so we can't heal what we won't reveal. Like, what we won't reveal, we just aren't, we're just choking the source of healing out, you know? Like, it's not that God is unable to heal us. It is, we are, like, you take a hose and you kink the hose and the water doesn't come out. It's not that the water is not able to come out, it's that we're doing something to prevent it from coming out. And I think that we have to reveal it in order for it to be healed. And a lot of that is, who am I doing this with? And we talk a lot about friendship. That's going to continue to be a core in this podcast. But the idea of covenant friendships over convenient friendships is something we've come back to before. Is covenant friendships are deeper. They're established on a deeper spiritual bond and level of, like, covenant friendship. It doesn't fade when it gets hard, or when there's hurt, or when we, do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. Those relationships are just deeper. They're not surface level, temporary, or image based. And so just want to encourage everybody just to identify one or two people this week that you can do this with. And in a few minutes, we're just going to kind of give some practical handles. But there's one other thing that we wanted to talk about on this subject of confession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love the title for it, The Circles of Confession. And I think that's just, like, really powerful, that confession, we talked a lot about confession is the sin struggles, or the areas that you're trying to move away from. But there's so many levels to confession. There's confession before you sin. There's confession of just admitting your dreams, admitting your goals. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about each one of those, because confession is more than just admitting sin. It's about bringing every part of your life into the light, to giving the Lord access to everything, access to, the pain and the hurt and the ways and the sin, but then also access to all the good in life too, to say that, there's nothing off limits for my friends to speak into, for God to speak into, for the Holy Spirit to work in your life.
Yeah. And I think, I was trying to think of putting this into terms. I told you earlier, this was like a sauna thought, I was in the sauna.
Your heat therapy.
My heat therapy. And, this was just kind of, I was thinking about this episode, and I was just thinking of, like, confession of sin has been a huge aspect for me. But I'm also, like, there's also other levels of confession. And so I was calling it realms of confession and dimensions of confession, but I just sat on circle because I just pictured like all of these things going in together, and like we can go between them. And so these are 7 kind of circles of confession. We're just going to go through them quick. And this is just to encourage you, hey, this is not just about confessing just sin. You know, this is about, like you said, bringing the hidden things to light for the glory of God. And so number 1, the first circle is confession of sin, owning our wrongs before God and trusted people. This brings healing, humility, freedom, and freedom from shame. What's number 2?
Confession of desire. So naming unhealthy or unfulfilled desires in safe community prevents them from quietly growing into sin.
Yeah. James 1:14 through 15, it says, temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. And I just think if we're only waiting to confess sin, we have missed one of the most beautiful opportunities for community and relationship. And I've walked different people, just a specific story comes to mind, walking a couple that ended up getting divorced and there was infidelity involved. This was a dear friends, followers of Jesus, but what ended up being part of the story was that one of them just had a desire for like 2 years to be with somebody else. And it was something that was under the surface, never talked about. Nobody knew about it. It was just this desire. And eventually that led to action, and which tore apart their family. And I have often wondered, like, what would it have looked like if that person would have had one friend or 2 friends that they could have been like, hey, I know this is going to sound really awful, but this is a desire, and that could be like a sexual expression desire, or it could be a fantasy about a different life, like maybe it's just, I have a desire to be anywhere but here, or a desire to, and I think like it's scary to say those things, but when you do that to the right people, not the people that are going like, yeah, you're right, find your truth, be happy. I just want you to be happy. No, I want you to be holy. And we need the people that are going to say that, because when we confess those desires, we shouldn't meet those people with, oh my gosh, that's disgusting. How could you ever think that your family is so amazing? Why would you ever? We just need to say like, man, can I enter into that with you? And there's a path to freedom and there's a path to healing, and we're going to walk it together instead of you trying to walk it alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The third circle is confession of lies. So this is exposing the lies we believe, breaks their power and replaces them with truth. And so inviting someone into, what are my thought patterns right now? What are the things that I'm believing about myself, and allowing someone to rewrite those with some truth.
Absolutely. Number 4 is confession of emotion. Honestly expressing what we feel opens the door to healing and deeper connection. We've talked a lot about this, just the voice of the heart, turning our emotions into prayers, but also confessing those emotions to the people in our life allows them to speak into those things and allows them to help point us to God. That's why all of the emotions are positive, because when we confess our loneliness to a friend, they can friend and they can help us find God in that place that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then confession of dreams. So speaking our hopes and callings out loud invites clarity, courage, and accountability. This is actually a pretty fun one. We just did this as a staff on Monday. You had to write down 5 dreams. They could be anything you wanted that you're dreaming about, and then we each just took 5 dreams from everyone, and you just prayed for other people's dreams. And it was just like this powerful moment of like, I can admit that I have dreams. Like, I can admit that there's things that I want. People I want to be married. We're trying for a baby.
Right.
I'm looking for a new job. And it was so cool to get to read people's dreams and get to partner in prayer for them. And it opened up just a level of unity amongst us and some of the spouses and other people in the room.
That's cool. I love that. And honestly, confession of dreams has been a huge propeller for me. It was telling a group of college students that I wanted to write a book that kind of pushed me over the edge. It was confessing, to the world about a year and a half ago that I was writing a book that has put the fire in like finishing it. And and different things along the way. So yeah, confession. Number 6, confession of gratitude. Acknowledging God's goodness shifts our focus from what's lacking to what's life-giving. I've had a practice of gratitude journaling for many years, but I think also incorporating it into relational community has been really cool too. It's like, here's some things that I'm grateful for. And I think it just paints just creates a cool moment just to do life together in a new way and to open each other's eyes with perspective.
Yeah, and then the last is confession of faith and doubt. So admitting both belief and struggle allows God to meet us with grace and grow our trust. So confessing when we have full faith in something, but also confessing when we're struggling. And it just reminds me of, I'm going to forget the reference, but in Scripture when they're holding up Moses' hands, like he's praising the Lord, he's praying to the Lord, he's calling on God to do something, and he has 2 friends that are holding his arms up, and just to say, like, hey, we're standing with you, like, as long as your hands are raised, we are with you. And just like inviting people to have faith amidst your doubts or amidst your weakness.
Yeah, that's good. That's so good. So kind of bring this to a close for you guys today. We want to encourage you to create a rhythm of confession. Confession isn't a one-time event. It's a rhythm to build into your everyday life. So identify your confession rhythm. So who do I trust? I sounded like an owl there.
It sounded just like an owl.
Yeah, it was a very good owl, actually. Who do I trust enough to be honest with? So these are the 3 P's of confession, of a rhythm of confession. People. Who do I trust enough to be honest with? P, place. They're all P, sorry. Place. Where can I have these conversations? Coffee table, car ride, small group. I know, like, for my life group, we meet in a coffee shop, and when we got to that week, and I think, like, we all talked about, we want to normalize this so that it isn't something that but we went to a different environment where we knew that there wasn't going to be random people sitting 3 feet away from us. Because that was just something, especially early on, that just restricts you of like, oh, I don't want that person I don't know to hear this. And so finding that place, I have a friend that a lot of our conversations happen on car rides. Like, instead of sitting at a coffee shop, we'll grab a coffee, we'll get in the car, and we'll just drive. And I've found that environment is so easy to share and confess and to talk like real stuff. So the place, and then prep. What do I need to bring into the light this week? Like, I think it's okay to enter those conversations with some things written down and just being able to say, like, hey, I've brought these things to God, but I also want to bring them to you. And, so people, place, and prep, and ultimately just restoring the communal confession. I mean, I think if you can do this with one person, great. But if you can create, a little, like you did, a few people, that's even better, because this is what it was meant to be, was a communal practice that's intentional, safe, and grace-filled. And so any notes to kind of add to that, Megan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate too, again, like when you were talking about the prep side, writing it down and saying, like, coming prepared to those, but also like making sure we are still going to God in all of it. Like, he deserves the first confession from us, and he's who we're going to feel and receive forgiveness and grace from. And if we only ever go to other people to be our God, to be the one that's going to make us feel better, I think we lose out on part of that too. And so it really is a both and. So if you're listening to this and you are like, I've never even confessed before at all, this is totally new, take that to the Lord in prayer, and then ask him, like, who can I invite along in this journey too? And so really partnering with it with the Lord personally in your time with him, but then also inviting people in.
Yeah. And I think if you lead a life group, maybe just brainstorm with a couple people in the group of, like, how can we incorporate this? Like, how can we start to practice this? And it's good to ask questions like, what's one area where you need prayer or accountability this week? Just kind of, I think sometimes I've been in groups where the prayer requests are very external. It's just like, my aunt is struggling with this, and I want to be able to pray for those things. So it's not a and or it's not a or, it's an and. But also, like, what's going on internally that we can be praying for. Practicing confession as care, which is just listening without judgment, offering prayer, and speaking truth in love. This is all to be done in love. It's not about exposure. It's about encouragement and healing. And I don't know, just something that kind of stands out is when confession becomes communal again, healing becomes normal again. And I just think that as we normalize this, as this becomes just a natural part of Christ-like relationships, so will the healing that comes with it. And so just want to encourage people in that. I know this is a big topic. This is maybe one that you're like, yeah, that sounds great. But I just would love to hear, how this would impact your life. And so give it a shot this week. Find a way to incorporate this. Find a way to practice this. And I just believe that God is going to bring a lot of healing to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, if you're anything like me, when I've gone through seasons where I know that there's something I need to confess or there's something that I'm hiding, listening to conversations like this, that's what I'm thinking about, and I'm thinking I'm nervous about if someone's going to find that thing, if someone's going to know about it. And so if there's something that came to your mind, that's also a good reflection, good starting point is what's one area you need to bring into light this week. And so if there was something that was on your mind, what is that one area? And then who can you ask?
Yeah. There's not a special person that we need to, there's no hoops. There's no hoops that we have to jump in and through to receive the forgiveness that God offers us through Jesus. And that's what you're saying. It's stay fresh with God. Don't hide things from him. Continue to do that. But also, I think for a lot of us, what we need to hear is you need to include other people, because the sustained healing and freedom and victory comes through those relational connections and bonds. So I'm excited to hear and to see how God uses this in your life. We're so grateful for all of you. We're looking forward to connecting again on the next time on the Going Somewhere podcast. Praying for you. We love you. Have a great week. We're all going somewhere.
We might as well go there together.